Good morning, friends of common sense. Fabrizio Ciancio, the Italian radio in Florida, the Italian radio of common sense, and today we have an illustrious guest, Dr. Donzelli, whom I thank for the time he is dedicating to us. Hello.
Hello.
Okay, so, before I begin, I'll ask you a difficult question. I know, it's hard for me 15 years ago when I started, but I do it to everyone. What is the definition of common sense that you use in your general life and not only in work?
Something that sounds obvious to logic even if it does not necessarily correspond with what is said by the IPS and Dixit on duty.
Exactly. I created this radio. First the radio, then now I have also added video. So let's say television and internet. Precisely because I had difficulty defining this word common sense and I searched around for 3 months without finding anything. I found political, religious, psychological common sense, but I had not found something that I could explain to my 7-year-old daughter, until I put together a definition taken a little here and a little there that I then propose everyone decides what they want to do. In my opinion, common sense is to judge or make a decision that helps the greatest number of people, therefore the survival or lifestyle of the greatest number of people. Obviously there are trees, there is the environment in general, animals to consider, because we are all in the same society, we are all connected. So we cannot think only of us as I thought 15 years ago. What is good for me is fine, and no, we are a club. The doctors and scientists I am interviewing, each of them have their part, as we will now hear from you, and therefore we must not forget 2 things that must be an easy solution, or rather 3 things that. We must also understand the spiritual part of man without invalidating religions to the spiritual part, and it must be a long-term solution. Here is this for me after months understood, for it is the complete definition of common sense, but everyone sees what to do. So now for those few 2 or 3 aliens who don't know you, if you can give us a little presentation of who you are, what you did, and then let's go to the interview only.
Okay, I am a doctor specializing in hygiene and preventive medicine in food science. I have done my entire career within public health, where I have held a top role as a health manager, facility director since the age of 39. I was also general manager, and I am for 3 years in the Superior Council of Health in Italy, and I was an adjunct professor for a number of years. Now I have been retired for 7 years. I am president of the Allinear Sanità e Salute Foundation, which has no conflicts of interest. But based on what we believe, but verified, it has an alignment of interests with an ideal national health service that we have in mind, and with the very concrete health of the community of citizens in the long term, as you rightly said. I am also the coordinator of the Independent Medical Scientific Commission, which has been asking for an institutional dialogue since 2021 and which has finally arrived. It's arrived in 2024, that's fine.
Fortunately. Very well, and you have prepared slides to explain something that what I see around living, that many people cannot see, cannot understand. They may have wrong, false data that are in the media. So please illustrate us, help us understand what is happening here.
Then this study can be actually enlightening, and now I will tell you why it is so important. We have published this article in Microorganisms, which is a top-tier journal, a critical analysis of total mortality in the pandemic period, in particular in the years 2021 and 2022 in an Italian province that is that of Pescara, with 300,000 inhabitants. These are the authors: the statistician Marco Alessandria, the mathematician Malatesta, the epidemiologist Franco Barino, whom many probably know by reputation, and the undersigned public health manager and author of these slides. All of us have no conflicts of interest, however rightly verified. I haven't updated it to today because we have passed 90,000 views in just over 4 months. 90,000 views for the magazine, which is also a magazine with a title that has been around for years, but it is a record. So there is a great deal of interest around this work that moves from a work that was published in Vaccines by the University of Ferrara and Bologna, who had the delivery of the Pescara dataset by the ASLE of the province of the Pescara region, and what had they found? On the deaths, therefore, they also assessed the total mortality in the 2 years 2021 and 2022 and admitted that indeed in subjects with 1 dose of vaccine or with 2 doses of vaccine, mortality, standardizing the comparisons by age, was significantly higher by 40% with 1 dose. By 36% with 2 doses compared to the mortality of the unvaccinated. However, they believe they saw such a great advantage, 4 times less mortality, 0.22 practically, 4.5 times less mortality of the 3-dosed or multi-dosed compared to the unvaccinated, who concluded the same. Get vaccinated, it's good for you. Unfortunately, however, someone had suggested at that point to jump directly to the 3rd dose, avoiding the 1st and 2nd that caused the most deaths. Jokes aside, they did not consider time immortal, that is, immortal time bias is a systematic error, that is, unlike random errors, systematic errors always hit in the same direction. So one can increase the investigation with the whole population of the world, but it only gets worse. The power of distortion. What is this immortal time bias? They considered that those vaccinated against doses, who had a mortality of a certain type, had to compare themselves with the denominator of those vaccinated with 3 doses. In reality, they have to deal with a much narrower denominator, which is related to the person days in which these with 3 doses had the 3 doses. Because first they had done 2, first they had done 1, and before they were unvaccinated. So correctly calculating the person days, the denominator of the 3-dosed is very tight, but the deaths always remain the same. The numerator is that, so the number of deaths in the 3-dosed increases, the opposite happens in the unvaccinated. Because a part of the 3-dosed, the bidosate, the single-dosed were not vaccinated before. To get vaccinated in those 2 years and the unvaccinated person days must be loaded on the denominator of the unvaccinated, which then widens a lot and the deaths are diluted. With this situation I show the result. We published it on the repository at the beginning of Epidemiology and Prevention, which is the first Italian journal of epidemiology, and we were able to, thanks to the dataset that was given to us. As the university students of Bologna had promised, in the end they gave us this dataset, making it available for independent analysis. So we were able to do a multivariate analysis, also taking into account something that no one in the world has: the pathologies that the dead had during their lives, the chronic diseases that we had before dying. So we found these results, that subjects with one dose certainly died more than unvaccinated subjects, but much more, 2.4 times more. Subjects with 2 doses died almost twice as much as the unvaccinated. The subjects with 3 doses apparently died in the same way as the unvaccinated, but doing something more sophisticated, which is the analysis of the restricted mean survival time and restricted mean time lost, and looking at what is the life expectancy that these people can be estimated to have in the remaining life that the remains, it was seen that they too lost something significantly, that is, the subjects with 2 doses lost an average of 3.6 months of life. The subjects with 3 doses 1.3 months of life at the end of the life expectancy that an Abruzzese can, a subject from Pescara, can hope to have the state of affairs. So these 2 scholars that many of you know perhaps by reputation are 2 Englishmen from Queen Mary. Then Norman Fenton retired. They are a statistician, professor of computers, computer science, and the stratospheric mathematician Norman Fenton. They wrote on the Epidemiology and Prevention Repository, because they previewed this work, a very flattering comment saying that this is clearly the best quality study we have available to date on COVID vaccination in relation to mortality. What makes this research such an important advance? The fact that mortality from all causes was used, not COVID mortality, all-inclusive, and that it was divided by age groups and vaccination status. The comparison was standardized precisely by age and vaccination status. Someone hearing says, but it is obvious that they have to tell us if they have had 1 dose, 2 doses, 3 doses. Of course, it would be obvious in the light of the common sense that Fabrizio Ciancio cited to us. But no one does it in the sense that only the English did it in the world until May last year, and then, no longer being able to give plausible explanations, I think, why they died so much. More than the vaccinated, they said they would stop publishing the data, and so they did. The Australians did it until the end of 2022, and then they too, with data that became unmanageable, stopped publishing it. And then the third and last case to our knowledge is the one we got our hands on, with some further pluses, something more, because they also gave us the diseases they had before dying. Pescara will be small. There are 300,000. Let's say that the regions in Italy, evidently many regions have these data, but they have never made them available. I don't even know if they realize that it is important to assess mortality by vaccination status. The fact is that we were lucky enough and we were able to do it. Then, for a long follow-up of 2 years, 2 crucial years to evaluate the outcome of vaccinations. Many court studies like this have a follow-up of a few months or even weeks. 2 years is a lot and allows to mitigate the effects of some systematic errors that could not be corrected. With the data available, then instead, for the immortal time bias, we made a complete correction that was recognized, and the results you saw, they completely distorted the original result. Then we were able to correct confounding by indication bias. The systematic error linked to the indication to vaccinate for the diseases that a person had, and this is a very important correction, because the explanation that the British had always given of the fact that they died extremely more towards the end of their months of publication. Vaccinated, they said, it is clear that this happens because the elderly, more fragile and sick, therefore more exposed to death because they are like this, vaccinated them earlier, vaccinated them more for this. In reality, our analysis has made it possible to deny this interpretation, which therefore falls, and at this point what remains standing. We even found something that surprised even us. Let's say that yesterday those who read the truth in Italy had news of a very important study because it was done by a department head of the National Institute of Health who declared, look, that vaccines are not effective in sick people and therefore those to whom they are given precisely to protect them do not have protection. We have gone further, that is, this is the result, this table that I am illustrating to you, it is the result of what happens to people with different levels of vaccine doses, 1, 2, 3 doses when they have hypertension or do not have it. When they have hypertension, hypertensive people vaccinated with 1 dose die 49% more. Vaccinated with 3 doses die 24% more than those vaccinated with 3 doses who are not hypertensive. The same goes for diabetics, as well as for cardiovascular disease patients. Even for chronic kidney patients, they die 2.5 times or more if they have chronic kidney disease and are vaccinated with 3 doses. Subjects with obstructive pulmonary disease die almost twice as much, so we deny it, at least this study denies it. Then they tell us that we did something wrong and we discuss it. Or we show ourselves that in other studies with equal validity everything comes out different. We reason about it. But at the moment this is the most advanced study in the world and puts a very strong mortgage on the vaccination policy of vaccinating the fragile as a priority because they have fared worse under the same conditions of disease. Then another systematic error that can be guessed but cannot be corrected is that of harvesting, that is, who is the harvesting effect, who dies after the first dose, after the second, cannot be available to die after the third because he died earlier. So this effect is strong. This too can be guessed by looking at the database of the American Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which shows that in the first 3 weeks, in the first 21 days, most of the reports of association with death in vaccinated people are concentrated. So it is presumable that this effect is also important and that the 3-dosed are somehow survivors of a double dose, that they have already received and that somehow they unfortunately escaped it to die on the third. This thing comes out in a sensational way in the New Zealand data. Anyone who has the opportunity to watch on our website the Independent Medical Scientific Commission, the film by Gunnar who interviewed in New Zealand that heroic data manager who risked jail, going to prison, but made them public, sees that it is an effect that is not only here that. Occurred in New Zealand is frightening. This is another systematic error that cannot be corrected but can be guessed, and that would have made things much worse if it had been possible to correct it, but the available data do not allow it, is the healthy vaccine effect. The effect of the healthy vaccinated. You can see it, look at what stuff. In the Czech Republic, these data have given, they show that in the periods when COVID-19 had high mortality incidences, mortality among the vaccinated was less than half that of the unvaccinated, and what happened instead when COVID was practically absent? The same thing, that is, the vaccinated died about half of, or even less, the unvaccinated. And then it means that they are not comparable courts. They are structurally different, and why does one not imagine them if he does not see what I am about to show myself? The systematic error of the healthy vaccinated in the short term, those who are not well, everyone's experience. Postpone vaccination. When one does it is because at that moment he is fine. So there is a first possibility of having a leveling link to the fact that at the time one gets vaccinated he is in shape. In the short and medium term, a worse, heavier thing, terminally ill patients are less likely to be vaccinated, either because a doctor of common sense, as Chancho said, can say, but we are stressing him to do, he has so much for a short time, in a few weeks he will no longer be there, or the parents, children, relatives, or the sick person himself says, but leave me alone. But then he dies, and his death is loaded on those who have not been vaccinated or those who have a previous vaccination status. So the one who is vaccinated is apparently unloaded, especially the one who has done more. Third argument, from the in the short to long term, people with socioeconomic disadvantage may have less access to vaccines and are also more at risk of death. Let's think of the homeless. Who is it that goes to vaccinate the homeless? Or those abandoned at home alone, who have a high risk of death from loneliness and have no doctor to visit them, nor anyone to accompany them to a vaccination center? Die. At that point the registry registers them and they are unvaccinated. In the short and medium term, those who are more convinced of the effectiveness of a treatment have a positive placebo effect. So this also weighs heavily, and in the medium and long-term people with a higher education tend to have a series of advantages that make them die less. They tend to have more prudent driving behavior, have better health care, and yet also adhere more to vaccinations that are recommended by all levels of health and institutions. In the medium and long term, those who adhere to preventive interventions, there is very strong evidence that it is more likely to adopt healthy lifestyles. If you look at an administrative database, it doesn't say that you walk a little more, that you smoke a little less, that you eat a little better than those who don't join. But that's how it is. He takes a little less unnecessary drugs, takes drugs less, and for all these reasons dies less. However, vaccination is also more, and the qualities that it would not be entitled to have are attributed to vaccination. But the scariest thing is the so-called chip trick. Fenton and Mill discovered this very thing that I showed you earlier. And what is this cheap trick? It is something that all the doctors who deal with these things in the world have fallen into, apart from someone who may have understood and persisted in bad faith. But I believe that most are absolutely in good faith, and thinking that it is always done this way continues to. Inertia to do what? To make a 14-day shift that even in Italy, then you will see, the Istituto Superiore di Sanità candidly declares, but that's what we do. That is, who something that happens in the first 14 days after an inoculation is borne by an unvaccinated person. Because, even if he dies, of course, because the vaccine could not yet have had an effect. So he is dead, he is common sense, he is dead, but he is the responsibility of the unvaccinated. Even if he has had a dose for 14 days, you understand a little. Then this creates a statistical illusion greater than one can imagine. If you repeat this shift every week, that is, Fenton shows and provides an Excel program with which you can have fun. Enter the number of people you are monitoring in the two arms. The effectiveness of the vaccine is also zero. This is the result of zero efficacy of the vaccine, a fake vaccine, a placebo vaccine, and in the first few weeks with this trick it seems effective, and only after 3 months and more does the curve flatten. So this also plays into Big Pharma's hands because it says, well, it's time to get a booster dose, because the protection of the vaccine has been lost. So it's all a vicious circle that is being fed. Here, I show you that, again according to Fenton and Neal, that even with a vaccine with an effective vaccine, negative effectiveness, it can appear at the beginning 90% effective. If you do this trick of 14, others do it 7 days after the booster or 21 days at the beginning. There is a lot of heterogeneity. You see that when the vaccine has a negative efficacy, that is, it increases the rate of infection. The same in the first months seems protective and then goes below zero. Does this remind you of anything? Have you seen the curves over time that it becomes negative and then goes below zero? This one is the elephant in the room that with its weight crushes the curve of infections or deaths among the vaccinated below the level of the unvaccinated. In conclusion, in light of the results described, those who wish to continue with these vaccination policies must first come to terms with this research. It is not certain that we are necessarily right, and we are ready to discuss with anyone. We have already done it with 3 epidemiologists who challenged this work and tried to find the flaws. With one we went ahead with exchanges 4 times back and forth. In the end he said, "But there is nothing to say, that's fine. But if someone else wants to try, you try." Either they tell us that we have made mistakes, and if we had made them we would recognize them, or they present us with broader research, more extensive over time, which says the opposite, and we evaluate them. But in this case we also ask again to have the data set and to be able to repeat independent analyses because, as Popper says, a science that avoids dealing with its own possible mistakes, immunizing itself against criticism to always appear true, is not a science. So I'll show you the British data as the latest demonstration of the enormity that has been made to us unknowingly. These are the British data that show that, when they stopped publishing them in May last year, it was already happening that in standardized mortality reports, standardized by age and sex, in the age groups from 18 to 39 of the young or the very old, over 80 years or above, the mortality of the vaccinated already exceeded, even with their data, that of the unvaccinated. I'll show you the series. Keep in mind that even the data, as you will see, of non-COVID mortality, for everything that was not due to COVID, were extraordinarily better at the beginning, as if the vaccine were holy water in the first months and then progressively worsened following those of total mortality. But clearly it is impossible for non-COVID mortality to be so preserved at the beginning and then it ends up at zero and reverses. Because the vaccine is not plausible, which reduces mortality for everything and not just for COVID. So I'll show you, these are the young people from 18 to 39 years old. You see that they intersect the mortality line of the unvaccinated as early as the end of 2022, and then significantly increase their mortality. This is the situation of 40 to 49-year-olds who have not yet reached the mortality level of the unvaccinated. But we are only in May 2023 and look at the beginning this implausible thing, this dotted and non-COVID mortality. But how is it possible that at the beginning there is a non-COVID mortality that it is almost half that of the unvaccinated if the vaccine is only for COVID? These are the 50 to 59 years, these are the 60 to 69 years, the 70 to 79 years. Always this trend, that is, this linear growth in the months of mortality, and these are the 80 to 89 years, and they have come to meet the mortality of the unvaccinated. And these are the 90-year-olds and over 90-year-olds. These poerected already for months before the month of May 2023 have crossed the mortality of the unvaccinated and have exceeded.
Allora, avevano incrociato la mortalità dei non vaccinati e hanno superato.
So those who wanted to be protected were put at greater risk already by the admission of the British Statistics Office, which no longer knew what to say, and we did the calculation of the angular coefficient, that is, to see the slope of these curves, if the trend continued and when it crossed the mortality line of the unvaccinated. It had already happened in May for some classics, as I told you. For others it would have taken place in September 2023, in January 2024, in February 24th. Those who resisted the most apparently were the 50 to 59 years old who arrived in July 2024 to exceed. So they have already got there if they published the data and if the trend had been maintained. But it is difficult to think with curves of that kind that the trend would not continue after that. And now you understand why he stopped publishing them in May. Because they no longer knew how to get their hands out of their hair with what they were seeing, but they didn't want to admit it. And I'll show you now the thing in the last most shocking roundup. There is the chip trick as it operates. Look at this. Months of April, May, June 2021, the over 90s. Here in April they have just surpassed the mortality of the unvaccinated. But what happens in May and June? Mortality increases by 3.5 times, but how is it plausible? They have launched the second doses and the deaths in those with only one dose are increasing, understand? Because the deaths made by the second dose throw them back on those who had only one dose and say they had only one dose. These are the subjects always 90 years old with 2 doses, and here we see that September, October, November and December. Look here, what's going on? Why does it go from the mortality level of the unvaccinated to shoot up 2.5 times? It's because they launched the third doses and they say that the bidosates died, understood? These are 89 years, even worse, these with 1 dose, but look at that stuff. You go from a level around 1 in April, in May, In June they are 4.5 times as a difference. It is not plausible if not for the operation of that famous cheap trick. These are the Bidesati, same speech, look at what stuff. These are the 70 to 79 years, here it is worst of all. Here they even increase, here they were in April, they were apparently half of the dead, of the unvaccinated. And in May they die 3.5 times more and 5.5 times more in June. You see what implausible stuff if you don't understand it with this interpretation. These are the Bidesates, same speech, these 60 to 69 years, same speech, look at what stuff. Here they are at 60% of the unvaccinated, and here the next month there are 3.5 times the unvaccinated. These with 2 doses, these without 2 doses, the same thing. And now, 40 to 49 years old, we see something singular that there is an explanation. The rollout of second doses increases in deaths, in single doses, but they also increased earlier. How come? Because a part, not a small part, of the English population was among the health workers or among the police, the military, the firefighters who had priority in accessing vaccinations. So they had the launch of the second doses that happened earlier, and therefore it seemed that before, that is, in this biphasic trend, in which the single dose, they died more than they actually were because of the second doses they were giving them. This is with 18 to 39 years old, here too there is this biphasic trend, and with 1 dose. When they launched the second doses for most of the population, we are already in 22 because they are young. They were not prioritized, but the young people who were in health vaccinated them immediately.
This means looking at the numbers and evaluating them, which for me is a bit complex, but I understand in general that they lied to us intentionally or not to. In short, and that the situation is much worse than what they tell us. Right, Alberto? This is what if one observes the obvious, one sees the truth, and with the truth someone famous said that we will become free. So let's look at the numbers. Let's get help, maybe understand them, because it is perhaps not very easy for everyone. But the trend, the general concept is simple to understand.
And then we think positively, in the sense that many who have listened to me have probably had 2 or 3 doses because they believed in what they were told, and now they say, what do we do? So when those of you who are believers go to the confessional and say, look, I have sinned, what do you say? Says, son, don't do it again. Enough, go, I'll absolve you. Here, do the same. Don't do it anymore and become an activist to get people to open their eyes. All right?
Exact. Okay, then I thank you. Thank you, friends who have listened to us. You know that on my radio there are also solutions to understand if a human body is suffering because of these inoculations, and so listen to the radio. See my videos that I am making to such incredible characters. Thank you so much for what you are saying, for what you are saying, for what you are doing. Doing in your life that is absolutely very important. So friends, share this video and let's talk to you next time.
Bye to the next bye.